Yeah, thank you guys all for having me here. It's really an honor and a privilege to be able to speak to you on your first meeting back, sort of post-pandemic. But yeah, I'm Darren Gross. I'm a wildlife biologist for Ventana. I've been there for just over 2 years now. And yeah, I'm just here to talk a little bit about the condors, sort of their natural history, a little bit about Ventana's history, their conservation, and how they're doing now. So first, a little bit about the organization, Ventana Wildlife Society. We were founded in 1977, primarily to start bald eagle reintroductions to Central California. And since then, we've participated in a number of other conservation projects. We've done bird banding previously, but now our main focus is the California Condors. And in addition to doing the condor conservation, we also have youth education programs. And other outdoor education opportunities like running tours down in Big Sur to see condors and other wildlife. Really with the Condor project. So we started working with the condors in 1997. U.S. Fish and Wildlife reached out to us based on the success of the Bald Eagle project and wondered if we were interested in reintroducing condors in Central California, and we obviously were. In 2003, we partnered with Pinnacles National Park to also help them start releasing condors over that way more inland. So sort of how it works now is that Ventana kind of manages the birds that use the coast in Big Sur and down south to San Simeon, and Pinnacles kind of manages the birds that are more inland. But really the flock is just this one giant flock that uses both areas pretty regularly. And yeah, just a couple other milestones here. So really 1999 was the first time we noticed, like, of the condors we released, the first time they were seen feeding in the wild. And in 2006, that was the first nest we had in Big Sur in the wild since they were reintroduced. All right, so just moving on to some sort of fun facts about condors. So they're closely related to New World vultures, like the Andean condors in South America, or the turkey vultures that I'm sure all of you have seen everywhere. They're also the largest terrestrial bird in North America. Their wingspan gets between 9 to 10 feet. This is a good chart to sort of show the comparison of some of the larger raptors that you'd see here. So you can see the condor is quite a bit bigger than both bald eagles and also the turkey vultures. So when you're seeing them down on the coast, if you're seeing them together, it's really obvious to tell the difference. But they also fly a little different because the condors have like much larger wings. They're able to fly much more steady on thermals. They don't. And turkey vultures tend to tip back and forth. So just something to keep an eye out if you're down the coast looking for condors. Just talking a little bit about more about their biology. So as I said, they're the largest terrestrial bird in North America. They get between 18 to 25 pounds, and they can fly a pretty good distance in a day. They can fly up to and sometimes even over 250 miles in a day, but typically on a day-to-day basis, they're flying less than 100 miles. But they'll go pretty far to search for food, or if they notice other condors going in an area, they'll fly over there too, since they're so social. It takes a while for condors to reach breeding age and sort of get that adult coloration. So when they first fledge, they sort of look like that top photo, top right or top left for you guys, photo up there. Their skin doesn't have any of that pink color yet. Their eyes are this really dark brown. They don't really, they can inflate their air sacs, but they're not nearly as noticeable as they are in the adults. And then typically around 3 years of age, they start getting that pink color. It kind of starts moving up their neck first, and you can see it too on their crops and coming down their legs as well. But their heads will still kind of be this mottled like black and pink color. And their eyes also start to change to a red color, especially the red sort of sear around their eyes. But then when they're 5 to 6 years of age, they're pretty much got their full adult coloration. The head's completely pink. The neck is totally pink. And they can kind of change the color of their skin to sort of communicate with each other on their mood or how they're feeling, like if they're feeling aggressive or calm. They can communicate that both with the coloration of their skin and also how much they inflate their air sacs. And they live a really long time. They can live up to or between 40 to 50 years in the wild. The oldest bird in the flock that we have here in Central California is just over 24 years old, so not even really toward the end of the age range there, really kind of in the prime of his life there. All right, so talking a little bit, getting into sort of the management and why we put tags on these birds. So yeah, the visual tags help us identify each individual, and it's just one of the ways we help keep track of them. Each color denotes sort of a series in 100. So the bird picture here, the red tag shows that his number is a number within the 100 series, and the 99 denotes that this bird is 199. So like the others there, you know, purple would be 600, so that tag on top there would be for bird 615. And so that's sort of how we identify each individual. Just a quick note here on the bottom, if you do see a condor when you're in Big Sur over in Pinnacles National Park and get a look at the tag, if you can see a number or a color, there's this website that one of our biologists developed, condorspider.com, and you can go there and look for the condor that you saw or try to ID it. But the other things we put on these birds besides the visual tags are radio transmitters, and some birds even have GPS transmitters. And the radio transmitters, those help us. We go out almost every day tracking along the Big Sur coast with a big antenna to try to pick up the signals that those radio transmitters emit. And again, that's just one way we can keep track of where they are and how they're doing. And the GPS transmitters even more so can show us where they're going. And from that GPS pattern too, we can find out if, where birds may be nesting or where they may have found food somewhere outside of the range where we typically find them. And so we do biannual trap ups with the birds, and we try to just trap as many as we can just to replace their transmitters. And in that time too, we'll also give them health checks, make sure they're all okay, give them like West Nile vaccines, take a blood sample to test for contaminants in the blood. And then when we're all done with that, we just release them right back into the wild. And so the birds, it's kind of interesting how they sort of follow the process. The older birds are very hard to trap because they know exactly what's going on when we're doing it. So they're really smart about it. And the young birds, not so much. They just walk right in and are kind of confused about the whole process. But when they get older, they get pretty wily. This guy wasn't too bad. He's still getting used to the process, being only around 3 years old. As I said before, you know, on a day-to-day basis, they're not typically flying more than 100 miles, but they can fly up to and over 250 miles in a day. But this kind of just shows the range for 2020. As you can see, most of the birds we saw were between Big Sur and Pinnacles National Park and then down to San Simeon, where we also have a release site. But there were some birds that flew up to the Livermore area, and we also had birds fly down south, sort of to that southern range of the Los Padres National Forest, and that's actually where the southern flock of California condors is that the Fish and Wildlife Service manages. They're really well adapted to scavenging. They have really sharp beaks, a really strong beak and bite overall. They have really great vision. So unlike turkey vultures, they don't actually use their sense of smell to find food. They use their vision. But a lot of times it seems like they're looking for the vultures who are finding food first, and then they'll go in and then show the vultures who's boss. But they also have serrated tongues to help them scoop like meat out of a carcass, and also the bald heads helps keep them clean and free of any germs or the parasites. So they'll really eat anything they can find that's dead. I mean, that can range from like anything as small as a ground squirrel up to a beached whale. Here there's a sea otter that washed up in Big Sur that these two condors are feeding on, and I'm trying to keep this vulture away from. But yeah, it's been a while, but whenever a whale washes up, it's a pretty big event. This was from maybe around 10 years ago now. But this whale washed up in Big Sur, and it fed the condors for months. And even after all the meat was gone, they still went down there to hang out on the bones, just looking for anything they could find that was left. Moving on to their courtship and breeding behaviors. So sort of around late fall, early winter, we'll start seeing males displaying. And they do this sort of dance where they spread their wings out. They get really colorful and put their heads down and kind of do this like swaying motion toward females. And around midwinter, we'll start seeing females laying eggs. And a pair will raise one chick every other year. And the egg it's pretty large, about the size of an avocado, weighs about half a pound when it's first laid. And females incubate for 57 days, so and males, sorry, they take turns incubating, but that's a really long incubation period. And then here on the coast, I'll show this more in the next slide, we see them more in redwood trees, but really they'll nest in any large cavity they can find. So in pinnacles, we see a lot of birds that use caves and cliffs or mountainsides and things, but here on the coast, we see a lot, pretty much almost exclusively redwood trees that they're using to nest in. And so a lot of times it's these larger, older redwoods that have survived the fire but have been hollowed out to some degree. And they're finding this burnt out cavity in the tree to nest in. So once an egg hatches, the chick is in the nest for, again, for a pretty long time. It's in there for about 6 months, and during this time, the parents are just constantly bringing food back and feeding it. They'll still incubate a little bit when it first hatches, but the chicks are able to thermoregulate on their own pretty quick. But yeah, just during that whole time, they're really just kind of sitting there and growing. Feathers start developing. At about 30 days old, they're around the size of a chicken, or to about 4 pounds, and then around 4 months, they're up to about 16 pounds, which is almost full grown. You can see the feathers have really grown in there. They're not fully developed yet, but it's kind of a good mix of the feathers that they'll keep as adults, and then also the down that they have. And then you can kind of see too the head color is much more of like a gray when they're young, but it'll keep getting darker as they reach fledgling age. And yeah, that'll come around 6 months. They'll be able to fledge or be old enough to fledge. Their feathers will be fully developed. And they tend to leave the nest. They don't really go very far at first. They're just kind of hopping around from one branch to another, and as they slowly learn how to fly and use their wings. But yeah, for the nests that we can't always access, just because some of them are so remote, a lot of times we'll find out a bird is fledged because we'll see one of these guys show up on the coast, just a young bird with no tags or anything on it, typically around one of the parents that we know is nesting. But yeah, they're just, it's kind of cool to see a bird without any tags on it. A lot of times we wish we could just leave it that way. So yeah, just kind of talking a little bit about the nests we have this year. So there's 6 active nests right now in Central California. 2 of them are over at Pinnacles National Park, and both of them are in caves. And that's chick 1078 and chick 1096. And then we have 4 here in Big Sur, and all of these are in redwoods. So it's chick 1077. And a note with that nest, unfortunately the female 438 died about a month ago, but the male is still raising the chick on his own, and we're detecting that from his radio signals. He's still going back there pretty regularly and feeding that chick. And that chick is also pretty old. It's kind of at a stage where one parent can successfully take care of it at that stage. And then yeah, chick 1089, chick 1095, and 1104. Those are all along the coast in redwoods. Just to show you some photos of these chicks that we've been going out to see. So this is chick 1089. The photos here, it's about 3.5 years old in this photo, and that's dad bird 204 perched above. And he's just kind of poking his head out here to get a look at things. Since we've been back, this chick is pretty curious. He tends to stick his head out of the nest a lot, and he's trying to get out, but he's nowhere near ready to fledge yet. But yeah, definitely curious about the world around him. Same thing with this chick 1104. We think this is the oldest chick that we have on the coast. And again, this photo's from when he's about 4 months old. And you can kind of see he's got his neck air sac inflated a little bit, maybe a little bit of a crop down there too. But yeah, in the last chick, hopefully this video will show, but yeah, this is chick 1095, who's probably the most energetic chick I've watched. So let's see. So yeah, this is like a great day doing nest jobs. A lot of times we'll go out and you'll catch them when they're napping, or and you'll sit there for 4 hours and either not see them or they just won't move. But yeah, Chick 1095 is great. He also likes to snap at flies. Unfortunately, I don't have a video of that, but it's been a lot of fun to watch. All right, so getting into some numbers about how the condor population is doing now. So, sorry, actually that shouldn't say 2020, but the population now is at 496 birds. Still, like, it's a little bit down from last year, but again, compared to where they were in 1987 with only 27 birds, it's a lot better than the situation they were in. We have 318 birds free flying in the wild. And again, those are split between sort of the different locations where they've been released. So that's Arizona, Utah, and Utah. There's 103 birds there. That flock is managed by the Peregrine Fund. Here in Central California, we have 82 birds total. Southern California, which is managed by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, they have 93 birds. And then there's also a population in Baja, Mexico, which is, I think, co-managed by San Diego Zoo and one of the zoos down in Mexico. Yeah, and so the total captive population is still around 175, and we get birds from the captive breeding program every year to release into the wild. This fall we'll release, I believe, 6 birds in Central California, which is pretty good. Last year we did 7, and so typically it's about 5 to 7 birds we're releasing into the wild each year. And this will just kind of give you an idea of where the locations are. So yeah, there's where we work in Big Sur and Pinnacles National Park is that circled area up there that we manage. And then the Bitter Creek is one of the release sites that U.S. Fish and Wildlife manages and releases birds from. And that population, I mean, they'll spend time around there, but they're also working their way up to Southern Sierras now too. And then, yeah, the Peregrine Fund, they're mostly based out of the Vermilion Cliffs there, sort of near the northern edge of the Grand Canyon. And those birds are even going up into Zion. I think there was a nest in Zion National Park recently. And then, yeah, the Baja population is also doing pretty well. So, you know, as I said, they're doing a lot better, but their numbers are still really low, and there's kind of various causes of mortality, but really the big one is lead. So really from 1992 to 2020, this just kind of shows the numbers of birds we've lost due to different causes. And as you can see, lead is basically like half of all the deaths we've had from 1992 to 2020. And so we're trying to fight that by placing carcasses out, like proffered feeding for the birds. And we get stillborn calves donated to us from local dairies to do that. And that's just helping us ensure that these birds are getting a lead-free source of food, just because there's so much of it out there still. Yeah, this kind of just shows, again, only up to from 2010 to 2020, but it sort of shows the trend. We had a little bit of a downward trend in 2020, but steadily these populations have grown between the total wild and then the captive population. So yeah, I think just to talk a little bit about the Dolan fire that happened almost a year ago now, just because it did impact us and sort of how we manage these birds, because it burned right through our sanctuary. And these photos are like the next few photos I'll show. A lot of them are from a live streaming cam we have at our sanctuary that typically shows birds feeding on the carcasses we feed out, but it also captured the fire as it moved through. Yeah, so it started last August 18th, about 4 miles from our sanctuary. Yeah, and it burned over the sanctuary and also 4 nests that were along the coast there. Yeah, everything, we lost all of our structures, but we've still been able to use the feeding slope, and a lot of those, like the smaller things, remained intact for us to still use. But we had like a cabin that we stayed in, and also our release pen up there when we used to release birds in Big Sur. Yeah, all that was burned over. We lost 12 condors total, and yeah, the fire was massive, burned over 128,000 acres. Yeah, and this just kind of shows, it was because the camera was on and sort of showing all this, we tried to watch it as much as we could just to keep a track of the status of everything, but it was both, I don't know, we watched in awe, but also just kind of bewilderment, and but there was some good things that came from the fire. So one of the chicks that was getting a lot of attention at the time, Aniko, did survive. Her trees remained intact. It did burn over, but we did find, like shortly after that area burned, we were able to go out there and confirm that she was okay. But she had quite the story, though. Oh yeah, real quick, these are just some photos of the nest tree. Where she was, well, yeah, just where she was at the time, and really this tree used to be a lot thicker at the bottom. We're kind of hoping that, it seems like the female still likes to use this tree to nest in, but we're hoping they might find a different one, just because the tree is definitely less stable than it was, but still good enough for now. Yeah, so as I was saying, Aniko kind of had to deal with a lot. So even though she was okay from the fire, because her father, Condor 167, who was one of the more dominant birds in our flock, he was one of the birds that perished. But her mom, 190, was still doing a great job of taking care of her, but still with having one less condor around to defend the territory, it was open for others to try to come in and claim. And so around mid-October last year, another male came in to try to claim the territory, and tried to kick Aniko out of the nest. But actually her mom, 190, was around, but in the scuffle, they all kind of tumbled out of the tree. It seemed like both the adults, Aniko's mom and the intruding male, were okay. They flew off. And Aniko, it looked like at first glance, she looked okay. She was standing outside the tree still, mostly on the ground. And she was around fledging age, but this was probably a little bit before she was ready. So we monitored her for a while, and it did seem like she really wasn't moving too much in the few days after this happened. And we were concerned, like it looked like she may have had a limp a little bit, so we were just a little concerned and wanted to sort of take care of her. We just thought she wouldn't be safe if we left her in the wild, like in that situation. So a little later, we hiked out and actually rescued her, trapped her with a hand net and grabbed her and put her in a kennel and hiked her out of the area. Let's see. Sorry, I lost my mouse. There we go. Yeah, and just hiked her out of the area and took her to LA Zoo to sort of just recuperate and heal up. And she's doing really good now. She's with a cohort of other condors that are her age, and we'll actually release her this fall, or probably, yeah, late fall, early winter. She'll be released back into the wild from our San Simeon release site. So yeah, as I mentioned, the fire really did a number, but we're seeing it was kind of cool and inspiring to see a lot of like vegetation grow back almost immediately. And then in terms of the condors, I mean, they just kind of went on doing their thing. They still come to the sanctuary all the time. We're still able to use the feeding site. And we're working on rebuilding right now. We're getting the debris that from the fire, we're getting that cleaned out soon, and we'll be rebuilding the structures shortly after that. Yeah, and really, again, just despite the tough year that it was for the condors, I mean, we're still really hopeful and have a pretty bright outlook on things, because the wild populations are still successfully nesting and foraging, and we're still releasing birds into the wild to help grow those populations. As I pointed out, lead poisoning is still the leading cause of death, but we are doing things to help fight that. I mean, there's a statewide ban on the use of lead ammunition for any hunting activity. And also we're still trying to help support hunting, but with non-lead by giving away non-lead ammo for free. And if you have any questions about that, you can talk to Mike Stake in the audience here. But I'm also happy to answer your questions on that. But yeah, I mean, really, as I said, it was a rough year, but things are looking up. Like the nests this year have really been inspiring for all of us and help keep us going.
Hey, Darren.
Yeah.
You showed a slide just a minute ago about the release pen getting burned. Clarification, were there any birds in that pen, and of the birds lost, were they all free-flying birds?
Yeah, so let me go back a little bit. Just to the slope. Yeah, so it's kind of hard to see, but the release pen is sort of this hazy box down here. There were not any birds in the pen at that time. And actually, for the past few years, we've only been using that pen for those trap-ups to replace transmitters on birds. All of our releases recently have been happening down at San Simeon, which was unaffected by the fire. So yeah, all the birds we lost to the fire were free-flying, or were nestlings that were still in their nest and couldn't escape. And the fire just kind of hit it's kind of a perfect storm of just like bad things. I mean, it burned over the sanctuary overnight, so all the birds were roosting, and because the sanctuary is a popular spot for birds to roost, there was just a high density of them there at the time the fire burned over. Typically, we don't see fires do nearly this much or cause this much mortality to the condors or be this much of a problem. Again, I'm here to take your questions, but also if you want to learn more about the condors or the individual birds, you can find bios for them and more about our conservation project at ventanaws.org. And there's also a link to our live streaming cams there. We still have one on the Big Sur feeding site and also one at our San Simeon site. And during the nesting season, or earlier in the nesting season, we also typically run a live stream camera on one of the condor nests that we have access to in Big Sur. But yeah, thank you all again for being here. It really was awesome to be able to talk to you guys. And yeah, please, I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
So can you tell me a little bit about when we talk about the air sacs?
Yeah. Yeah, so it seems like to us they're...
Where are they?
Where are they? So yeah, they're mostly around the cheeks and the neck is where we see most of it, and then their crop is below, sort of like below where you'd imagine their chest is. And yeah, it seems like they mostly inflate or deflate those based on their mood and what they're doing. Yeah. There's some birds like hardly inflate them at all, and we have one bird 219. If you ever see him, he almost always has his air sacs inflated. Even when we're holding him, trying to replace his transmitter, he keeps his air sacs inflated, which is always a trip. But yeah, it seems mostly that they're using those to communicate with other birds about what they're like, how they're feeling, or what they're about to do. Yeah.
So you had the second leading cause of death as predation. So what preys on condors?
I was just going to ask that.
Yeah. No, great question. When they're adults, like when they're healthy adults, there really isn't much. But when they're nestlings, things like raccoons when they're young enough, or even ravens sometimes. Bobcat, if it can get into a nest, stuff like that is mostly what we're seeing in terms of what's predating the birds. But most of the healthy adult birds, they're pretty much spending all their time so high up in trees that nothing can really get to them there. And even on the ground, they're pretty alert. The past couple of years, we've had a bobcat that would show up at our Big Sur sanctuary, but all the birds are pretty aware of it. So we kind of know if we were like looking at the camera and there weren't any birds out and we had there was food just put out, we kind of know, oh, maybe the bobcat's around, because the condors seem to know and are pretty aware of what's going on there. But yeah, it's typically things like raccoons and ravens that'll get them when they're nestlings.
You said a female recently perished. What got her? One of the females recently perished, you said? What did she die?
Yes, yeah, Condor 438. Yeah, she recently perished. We don't know the cause of death yet. Based on sort of the events that happened around her mortality,